All right, fantasy owners, I got a question to ask you. Do you want to win in Week 15? Well, do you? Well, if you're watching this video, these are guys that I feel are not going to help us get to that level in Week 15. Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Stock Report. Chris Pearson here with you guys for this edition. These are the guys to avoid video. These are guys that I really either don't like this week or that I'm really kind of worried about a little bit going into Week 15. This is a critical week. It's playoff time. This is where we got to have the best players in. And these are guys that I just feel, you really shouldn't even touch. You shouldn't worry about. You should really really temper your expectations on these guys going into this week. Some of these guys are really just more desperate options if there's nowhere else to turn. If you're kind of clinging with kind of a weaker roster than your opponent, or maybe you're worried about some guys. These are guys, though, I'm just really kind of worried about this week. So let's just dive right in and get to these guys and share my thoughts on these guys, because I know there's for sure a lot of decisions you got to make this week and this weekend before the Thursday night game this week. So here we go. Guys I don't like at quarterback this week. I hate to say it, but I have just this strong feeling that Denver is going to destroy Baltimore this week. I just have this deep thought in my mind. Baltimore's D has been at times wonderful this season, but with all the injuries, it's taken their toll this week. I think Peyton Manning is just going to have a field day on them, which means that I don't like Joe Flacco this week. I don't like him against Denver. Granted, Baltimore's at home, but you got Champ Bailey in the secondary, the pass rush with Von Miller and Doomerville and that loaded Denver front. I just don't see how Flacco can have a good game this week. Granted, he's not an elite fantasy quarterback by any stretch anyway, but some owners have relied on him in good matchups, which is fine. But I just don't think this is the week that you really want to ride Joe Flacco to a fantasy win. I just can't see it happening. So I'm just really worried on this one. I can only rate Flacco as a number 2, number 3 option this week for this matchup. I don't see him as a starting guy. I think he's going to have a really tough time. I think it's going to be more about Ray Rice on the ground because Denver's secondary is so good. And granted, they might try to bottle him up too, so you don't know what really they're going to do. But I think that rush is just going to be so troubling that I can't predict a strong week for Flacco this week. So not a fan of Flacco or Baltimore this week. Colin Kaepernick going up against the Patriots. I'm not a fan of him this week either. Granted, I know that Kaepernick has looked very strong as the San Francisco starter in place of Alex Smith, but it's at New England. And at New England, the Pats just made Matt Schaub in Houston look miserable, look mediocre, look just downright terrible. They flat out destroyed them last week. Houston's team was mostly just completely shut down when it came to fantasy production. So I think it's going to be a very tough kind of sledding day. I can only rate Kaepernick as maybe a low-end number 2, maybe even high-end number 3 for this matchup based on how tough New England made Houston look last week. New England. What's amazing about New England, at least to me, and I don't know if you guys have noticed, against the top teams, like the really top teams, New England tends to do really well. But when they play somebody sometimes like the Giants or somebody that's kind of middle tier, here's New England's philosophy, at least to me. They crush the teams they're expected to beat, usually. Against the really top teams, they play their best. But then when they play these middle tier teams that usually are like the Giants the last 2 years in the Super Bowl and they're underdogs and whatever, is it just me or do they tend to play down a little bit? I don't know. I don't know if it's just me noticing this or what, but that's kind of what I've noticed. But San Francisco is another elite team. They have a lot to play for still. So who knows? But it's at New England. That's the thing. It's at New England. It's at the Razor where it's tough to win. So that's why I'm not fully sold on Kaepernick this week. I can only rate him low-end number 2, high-end number 3. Jake Locker going up against the Jets. Titans. Still find them hard to trust. Is there ever going to be an elite quarterback or receiver in Tennessee, that really is kind of the question for me. I mean, they drafted Locker to be their future guy. I mean, and but I don't think he's there quite yet. He's had time though. He's had time to kind of mature into this role as being a starter, but they've still got Hasselbeck there. So and they flip-flopped it all year, and the receivers, and Britt's not healthy, and it's really mind-boggling to me. So even with this strong matchup going up against the Jets on Monday night, I really am really just tempering Locker's expectations. I can't really rate him as a strong player for fantasy production just yet. I only see him as more of a desperate number 2, number 3 option this week. If you want to have a guy for the Monday nighter in your lineups because you think, he can create a comeback here or there, then maybe you go for that. But desperate, just desperate play at this point. Nothing more than that. Sam Bradford going up against Minnesota. Again, it's tough with St. Louis because the longer that Danny Amendola is out, the more I fear that Bradford isn't going to have the strong numbers that he's put up at times earlier in the season. And there are reports that Amendola might come back this week, but even then, coming off the myriad of injuries now that he has had this season, I don't know. I'm really worried about Bradford's production going forward. Do you really want to risk rolling with that in the playoffs at this point? That's the question you're going to have to ask yourself and see what's best for you going forward. So Bradford's more of a high number 3 for this matchup this week. I'm really not fully sold on him this week. I'm not fond of his other receivers either, and I'll mention those guys in a minute, or later on. But not fond of the Rams this week. And again, he's on this list just because, but Ryan Fitzpatrick going up against Seattle, if you're really relying on him at this point in the season, you're a lucky owner to rely on Ryan Fitzpatrick, and B, against Seattle, coming off that win, they're going to be jacked, they're going to be ready to go, they're going to be, this mentality of, they still have lots to play for. They're in the wild card hunt right now as a number 5 seed, so they're playing with a lot of energy and intensity right now. I wouldn't even try it. He's, I can only rate him a desperate number 3, number 4 if you're really in deep leagues at this point, but I wouldn't trust it at all. Okay, running backs that I don't like for the week. Again, I mentioned him, but Knowshon Moreno of Denver. I just have this strong, firm belief that Peyton Manning is going to have a field day. I just feel like they're going to destroy the Ravens with the pass. With the balls to Demaryius Thomas, to Eric Decker, to Dreesen, to Tammy, whoever he decides to throw the ball to. I don't think Knowshon Moreno is good. He might get, obviously he's going to get a lot of the work, but the question is what he's going to do with that work, and I don't think it's going to be very productive. The Ravens D, I think, will try to key on him throughout the night because I just have a feeling they're going to get burned by Manning and his receiving threats. So I'm not fond of it this week. I can only rank Moreno as a number 2, number 3 option. At this point, though, you might not have many better options at running back at this point, unless you have better. But I don't expect a big week from Moreno this week. I'm not fond of his matchup this week. Situation in Jacksonville, I'm not fond of this week. Really kind of a muddy situation there as well. We've had Jones-Drew out for the longest time with that foot issue. Now Jennings could be out this week. So now enter Montell Owens for the Jaguars. But and the matchup is okay. It's going up against Miami. The run defense, which was stout at the beginning of the year, not so much anymore. But I'm not sure if I'm a believer on him yet. Granted, 16 fantasy points last week, strong week. But do you really want to rely in the playoffs at this point on a guy who just had his first breakout week last week? I'm not so sold on that. So I only see him as more of a desperate number 3 option. Unless you have no better options this week, if you didn't get a guy off the wire you wanted, maybe like a David Wilson or something like that, maybe then you can put him in, but only as a desperate number 3 play, maybe deep leagues even. Or maybe PPR if they use him out of the backfield like they've been doing with a lot of their running backs lately, like Jennings, and because it's Jacksonville. Jacksonville hasn't been exactly great this year, if you've noticed. So, not sold on him. Next name, insert running back facing 49ers, blah, blah, blah. Stevan Ridley, Danny Woodhead, the Patriots. Granted, normally you start these guys as well, not Woodhead, but Ridley, as normally must starts every week. But again, the 49ers can't be run on. I think it's going to be Brady and his weapons in the passing game being thrown. Maybe they get involved in the passing game a little bit out of the backfield, like maybe Woodhead would, but I don't know. I'm really kind of on those guys this week because it's a tough matchup going against that Niners run D. I can only treat Ridley as maybe a number 2, maybe even high number 3 for this matchup this week just because of the matchup. But you might not be able to afford to sit Ridley because there aren't any better options out there for you. So just temper expectations on him this week because of the matchup. Vic Bauer to the Colts going up against the Texans. I thought he would find the end zone last week with the matchup that the Colts had. Didn't find it last week, but still had a solid week. Still had over 100 yards rushing, had 10 fantasy points. But it's tougher sledding this time going up against the Texans. Granted that D just got carved up by New England, so they know they can win the division this week with a win. They know that they have to beat the Colts this week to win the division. If the Colts win, the Colts clinch a playoff berth. So it's huge on both sides this week for this game. But just because of the matchup and the fact that Houston is going to be gunning for it and going to try to shut down as many of the Colts' weapons as they can, I don't love Ballard's matchup this week. I can only view him as a low number 2, high number 3 option for this matchup this week. And finally, more of a desperate option only because he's been so inconsistent is Reggie Bush in Miami. Granted, it's a great matchup going up against that Jacksonville D, but the fact that he has been really inconsistent this year, only had 9 fantasy points last week. I'm not fond of him this week. I only see him as a desperate number 3 play for you. Wide receivers that I don't like this week. Top of the list. I mentioned them a little bit ago that I was going to talk about these guys. And again, at this time of the season, I don't really think you can really trust a St. Louis Ram receiver that's not named Danny Amendola. I don't know. I would not want to rely my playoff success, my playoff potential winnings on Brandon Gibson and Chris Givens. I'm sorry. I just see them as way too inconsistent options at this point. Granted, now, let me say this. Have they filled in nicely for Amendola? Yes. But are they fantasy superstars like Amendola was as a solid number 2, number 3? By no means. I just don't see it. I don't think you can really rely on these guys at this time of year, at this point in the season. Maybe earlier in the year, if Amendola got hurt earlier in the year, or maybe it was out for the season, and then these guys could put up consistent fantasy numbers, then yeah. But what is fantasy football all about, boys and girls? Timing! That's right. So it's you can't put your stock in these guys at this point in the season. So I think they're both nothing more than desperate number 3s, maybe even number 4s for deeper leagues. Maybe in PPR leagues they might help you, but in standard scoring leagues, no, I wouldn't touch these guys. Just so you guys don't get thinking about it, Dante Stallworth of the Patriots, you might look and say, he had 12 fantasy points last week. He had 1 catch for a 63-yard touchdown. Leave him on waivers. He's a deep option in the Patriots offense at this point. Not worth it against San Francisco. Leave him on waivers. Dez Bryant of Dallas. This is a really hairy situation. He's questionable this week. He has had that finger evaluated up and down, left and right. At first we heard torn ligaments ending his season. Then we heard no, it's just a fracture. So now he's only questionable. Bryant has said, I'm going to try to play. I honestly doubt that he plays. Broken fingers are nothing to be messed with because even if you tape it together to the others, you're a wide receiver. What do wide receivers catch the football with, class? Their hands. That's right. So, I mean, I'm getting you guys really involved now, aren't I? So, but seriously, even if you tape them, there's a chance it slips off, it bounces funny. there's just so many possibilities. I think it'd be a safer bet if Bryant gets this really time to heal, maybe sets it out for the season. If Dallas makes the playoffs, maybe he'll be ready for the playoffs. There's a lot of question marks, but for this week, Dez, no, don't play. I don't think he's going to play. If he's questionable on the injury report as of Wednesday, I don't see him playing. I think he's a risk, even if he does play. So if I'm an owner in the playoffs and I have Dez Bryant and I don't think he's going to play this week, I put him on my bench. I don't take that risk. I don't want to have him starting in a lineup thinking, oh, he's going to play through a finger and then end up with a donut. You don't want to take that risk. So for me personally, I mean, if you want to monitor it, that's fine. But for me, I would have him on my bench. I don't think, torn ligaments, fractured finger fall off. I don't care. No, I would not play through either of that. So, and I know it's the NFL and it's a hard-nosed go-get-'em league and you want to play through anything, but no, don't do it. Don't take the risk. I might be wrong on this next guy, and I hope I'm not, but I really kind of have a worry with him this week. And that's Alshon Jeffrey of Chicago. Granted, he has cemented himself as the number 2 guy behind Brandon Marshall now that he's back healthy again. And he had a touchdown last week, so he had 11 fantasy points. But the concern I have this week with him is that Jay Cutler's availability, although Cutler said he's going to play, you don't know about that. You definitely want to monitor him throughout the week. Plus, the Packers need to win this game this week. They need to win to clinch the NFC North. And they'll want to do that more than ever against their rivals from the Midway. So they're going to go all out. They're going to focus on Chicago's weapons. I can only rank Jeffrey as more of a number 3 option for the matchup this week. I don't see him as a very strong threat this week. Just a little bit worried on him. But I could be wrong. And finally, one guy, again, you want to leave on waivers is Joe Morgan of the Saints. He had 10 fantasy points last week, but he only had 3 catches. He's still far behind in the Saints depth chart, even though the matchup's good against Tampa Bay. Oh, my. You want to leave him on waivers this week. Finally, and one more wide receiver I want to mention for a wild card for you. Dwayne Bowe of the Chiefs. I mean, granted, the matchup is great against the Raiders, but even with this matchup, you shouldn't really be relying on him anyway at this point in the season. The Chiefs' quarterback situation has been a mess all season long. He's nothing more but a desperate, I think, number 3 play this week going up against the Raiders. Just wanted to throw that one in there for you guys. Finally, tight ends that I don't like this week. Again, Ravens, Dennis Pitta. Don't like him this week. C. Flacco. I don't like him this week. I think he's nothing more than number 2, number 3 this week based on the tough matchup going up against Denver. Anthony McCoy of Seattle, and maybe this goes the same for Zach Miller, who haven't been strong options at tight end all year. They had big weeks last week in fantasy, but it was against that awful Cards defense. I think you just want to leave those guys on waivers this week. Grant Buffalo, not exactly great. If you want to start a Seahawks tight end, I think it's Miller is the one to own. But McCoy, his first breakout week, leave him on waivers this week. Again, Jared Cook of the Titans. Again, Jared Cook of the Titans going up against the Jets. The matchup is strong, but can't trust that Titans O. Just can't do it. I think he's nothing more than number 2, number 3. Scott Chandler of Buffalo, again. C. Fitzpatrick going up against Seattle. Desperate number 3. And this one might surprise you guys as my last name to sign off here with, but Owen Daniels of the Texans. Look, I said it. The Texans' offensive players all got shut down last week for the most part. Daniels only had 2 fantasy points against the Patriots. But I have a strong feeling that Houston is going to really try to utilize its major weapons against the Colts. That's major doses of Arian Foster. We know the Colts' run defense isn't exactly stellar. And Andre Johnson, the number 1 weapon of Matt Shaw. I think those guys are going to get a lot of the work this week, meaning less touches, less involvement for Owen Daniels this week. So I can only see Daniels as more of a number 2, number 3 play for you guys this week. All right, guys. That's it. That is the guys I don't like for the week this week. If you have not checked out the 5 to Ride video, please do so. We want you guys to be successful this week in your fantasy matchups. Like I said in the 5 to Ride video, it's not just about getting to the playoffs at this time of year. It is about going for the championship and going for the whole kit and caboodle. Again, thank you guys so much for your any comments, any questions you have. I will try to answer again as many as I can. Considering my busy schedule, I've been getting 40 hours of work these last few weeks because it's been the holiday time of the year. So, but I still have time to do these for you guys. So thank you again so much for the support. Good luck this week, and we'll do it all again for title week for a lot of you next week is week 16. And hopefully I will be there as well with my team. According to CBS, my team's a 30-point favorite. But at times it's been wrong this year, and that's why fantasy is so hard to predict. So hopefully we can only hope for the best and hope that our players don't put up donuts and underwhelming numbers. Thanks, guys. Good luck this week.